So we're recording now. So in today's talk, I'm going to be covering quite a few different areas in and around Turnitin. So we'll be covering the nuts and bolts of it shortly. Things like actually adding it to your Moodle module, the rubric manager, familiarity reports, and the feedback studio. But before I do that, I just want to talk to you about what exactly Turnitin is. It's the world's most effective plagiarism detection solution, and helps you manage potential academic misconduct. It compares student submissions to a database of publications, and I'll talk to you more about that database in a few minutes. And it returns a similarity score, so how similar is the student's paper compared to that database. It's easy to use. It has a feedback tool called Feedback Studio, and it's got some excellent grading features such as the rubric and rubric manager. But most of all, it shouldn't be thought of as a tool to catch students out. And I've heard this quite a lot, that it's just a way to catch students out on plagiarism and see if they're cheating, as some people would put it. But for students, learning academic writing is a large part of being in third level education. So a question is, what should we use Turnitin for? Well, it's for originality checking. It's for improving your students' writings. It allows you to have multiple submissions, so you could have up to 10 parts in a submission. So that could be an introduction, that could be a main essay, and then a reflective piece as well. So they can be treated as three separate submissions, and you can have separate hand updates for those, and we'll take you through those as well. And it's very useful as well for online feedback, and I'll show you the feedback studio, which is very richly featured as well. So when should you not use Turnitin? Turnitin is great for essays. It's great for academic type writing. It's quite poor at lab reports, technical documents, other documents with large amounts of common text. So we had an engineering group used before, and they were complaining about large similarity scores, but the students were working from a common template, and they're all using common language and quoting common regulations. So they're going to have large amounts of similar text in each of their reports. So a standard file submission would be the assignment activity in Moodle would be more appropriate for those. So too for PowerPoint, Excel, and video files. We've seen people using Turnitin for video files as well, which is, it's not designed for, and they're wondering why they won't display and they can't download them and things aren't working. And another thing, another common mistake that happens with Turnitin a lot is people using custom submission statements. So the first part of the document is a declaration that this is all my own work, and I have not copied, cheated, or whatever, and signed by the student. Now, that's going to return a high similarity score because it's going to be the same page on each student's document. And there is a submission statement built into Turnitin that a student will check when they're submitting. And I'll go through the wording on that shortly as well. So it's just something to be cognizant of when you're asking your students to design their handouts. So a question we get asked a lot as well is what's in the Turnitin database, and it is extensive. When a student submits an essay or anything to Turnitin, it gets compared to Turnitin's entire database, and there is actually settings to opt out of the entire database. But in terms of published content, there's over 154 million published content items. Books, newspapers, they've over 47,000 journals with 69 million articles in those journals. 91% of the top 10,000 cited journals are included in their database. So that's from Turnitin's website. That's extensive, it's comprehensive. It's not a whole lot your students can do that won't be detected, but there may be something, as it is 9% of the top 10,000 articles are outside of their database. So it's just something to remember as well. But it's a good indicator as to whether your students are using content or not. In terms of web content, 70 billion, billion with a B, current and archived web pages. Turnitin retains historical copies of all web pages it's crawled. So I might put up an article on the CTEL website today. I might edit that in 2 weeks' time. I might take it down in 2 months' time. And a student might find an archived copy of that somewhere along the way. So they might quote, or they might reuse some of the content from that without properly referencing it. And Turnitin would pick up on that because it keeps those old copies of web pages, and it adds 68 million new web pages every single day. So they've got servers that are just going out, looking at all the websites, looking at all the links on websites, following all the paths, taking a snapshot of the text that's on those pages and saving that. And when a student submits their Turnitin entry, it compares it to all of that. In terms of student papers as well, so it's not just comparing it to web article, published articles, web pages, it's comparing it to articles and submissions that other students have made. And there's over 1 billion student papers in their content database. So if they get a hold of last year's material, or last year's student gives them a copy of their essay, it will come up as plagiarized. And there's over 1 million student papers uploaded daily, and they have over 30 languages in their database as well. And it's important to say that if I submit an essay this year and I reuse a large portion of that essay for a subject next year, Turnitin will actually compare it not just to people in my class that have already submitted, but also if I've already submitted content to Turnitin before as well. And that's an important one as well. So students who submit their essays first, they'll get a submission, a similarity score, comparing it to the known universe as it existed when they submitted. So we'd say they get 20%. One of their colleagues comes along, with their classmates, and submits something. And there might be a lot of common phrases that the lecturers used. And they're submitting some of the same phrases, but it's their original work. And it will see the similarities within a class group as well. So their paper will be compared to anyone who's submitted before. So while they've got almost the same originality as the person who submitted before them, their originality score might be higher because it's now comparing their paper to the one that the student before them submitted, whereas the student who submitted first didn't have that difficulty. So in terms of Turnitin, comparing papers to other papers and known content, it's really richly featured and very, very useful. So going back to this point again, Turnitin is a tool to help you lay the foundation for original thinking, authentic writing, and academic integrity practices that will last a lifetime. So one of the questions we get asked regularly is, should I give a similarity score before the submission date for my students? And a lot of lecturers are still in this mindset where we're not going to show them a similarity score so they can go back and change their paper. I want to catch them if they're copying or if they're cheating. But this is really a tool to help your students learn how to write academically, reference properly, and not reuse other people's content or ideas. So I'd like you to think of Turnitin as a tool. You can have practice areas where they can submit content before your assignment, and then you can have the assignment activity where it does retain that in the database. So I'll talk you through those options shortly as well. So another question we get asked quite a lot is, what is plagiarism? So we all know what plagiarism is as academics, but what does Turnitin think plagiarism is? Because that's what our students' work is being compared to. And there's a couple of different resources I want to show you. Turnitin have some fantastic resources just on that point alone. So this is the first resource. It's their plagiarism spectrum, and this was their original plagiarism spectrum as defined and designed in 2012. So they talk about work as being a clone, submitting another's work word for word as one's own. So you can see the source text and you can see the student's work, and Turnitin will highlight that all in red. You can see Control C, so copying and pasting. It contains significant portions of text from a single source without alterations. So you can see the source text, and then you can see the student has changed one or two words, thinking they're being, able to outsmart the system, and Turnitin will pick that up and again color it in red. Students might do a find and replace, changing specific words or phrases, but retaining the essential content of the source. Again, you can see some of the words have changed in an effort to pass that off as one's own work. The remix, so paraphrases from multiple sources made to fit together. So the source text and again, the student's work. So different sources will be color coded, so you can find the sources as you go through. And as you mouse over those sources in Turnitin, it will come up where that text was copied from. The recycle borrows generously from the writer's previous work without citation. The hybrid model combines perfectly cited sources with copied passages without citation. The mashup mixes copied material from multiple sources. The 404 error, which is a bit of a nerd joke, it's page not found or file not found, includes citations to non-existent or inaccurate information about sources. So you might, your students might try to appear smart by including made up references that they're hoping you won't check or won't be able to find, but Turnitin will actually be able to recognize that as well for the most part. The aggregator includes proper citation to sources, but the paper contains almost no original work. So they might be copying from a third party who's quoted several different papers, and they're not referencing the paper that they've copied. They're referencing the original works. So Turnitin will pick that up as well. And retweeting includes proper citation, but relies too closely on the text's original wording or structure. So there's lots and lots of resources on Turnitin's website about all of the elements of plagiarism, and they're great resources to share with your students as well. And the language that's used in these, retweeting, aggregators, copying and pasting, is the language that our students speak as well. So it's good for them to see not just what academically, like we've a plagiarism policy. I think Sean Moran was involved in writing it, Dr. Sean Moran. So we've a plagiarism policy. It's good to familiarize yourself with that, with WIT's policy, but also because we're using Turnitin as a tool, it's good to familiarize yourself with what they consider to be plagiarism. They have an updated Plagiarism 2.0, which is a fantastic document as well. I have it open in the PowerPoint here. So the Plagiarism Spectrum 2.0 grades it from, original thinking when someone is doing the correct work, that's in green, and then it goes from green to red. So inadvertent plagiarism, student collusion, paragraph plagiarism or paraphrase plagiarism, word for word plagiarism, computer code plagiarism, self-plagiarism, source-based plagiarism, mosaic plagiarism, manual text modification, software-based text modification, down to bad things like data plagiarism and contract cheating. So using essay mills to basically contracting someone else to write your essays for you and Turnitin. You can pick up on styles of writing and recognize these things as well. So again, it's a very powerful tool in terms of that. And they also give you some strategies for what you can do to help your students overcome these, recognize and overcome these issues as well. So these individual areas or publications and links I will include in our webinar area in Moodle. I'll be giving you all the link to that shortly. Or if Connor's there, he might share the link in the chat. The self-enroll key is just Moodle 2020. So you can self-enroll in that module with Moodle 2020. So on to the submission statement. I've seen this a lot recently where lecturers ask students to sign a statement saying that the work is all theirs and all original, and include that on the first page of their Turnitin hand-up. So what Turnitin will do is it will recognize that entire block of text and say, well, that's 100% similar to everyone else's essay that's been handed up. And students will end up with an enormous penalty in terms of similarity score for that. But the first one who submits it won't. So they'll be looking great in the lecturer's eyes. But when you're submitting an essay into Moodle, and I'll show it to you in a few minutes, you'll have to tick a box with this statement to say that you've read this statement and you understand that this is your own work. So by checking this box, I certify that this assignment is all my own work and contains no plagiarism. By submitting this assignment, I agree to the following terms. Any text, diagrams, or other material copied from other sources, including but not limited to books, journals, or the internet, have been clearly acknowledged in reference as such in the text by the use of quotation marks or indented italics for longer quotations, followed by the author's name and date, either in the text or in a footnote endnote. So this was part of the policy that was implemented in WIT in 2008 and adopted into Moodle in, I think, 2010 or 2011 when we started using Turnitin. Goes on to say that these details are confirmed by a fuller reference in the bibliography. I've read the sections on referencing and plagiarism in the handbook or in the WIT plagiarism policy, and I understand that only assignments which are free of plagiarism will be awarded marks. I further understand that WIT has a plagiarism policy which can lead to suspension or permanent expulsion of students in serious cases. So the statement is comprehensive, and students are agreeing to this every time they submit a file to Moodle or turn it in via Moodle. So I think it negates the necessity or any real need for the use of a submission statement at the start of a document for students. And that's how it looks when the students are submitting. So they cannot add that submission without ticking that box. And if they try to click on add submission, it will say you need to agree to this, and it won't let them pass. So the next question is, how do I add a Turnitin activity to my module in Moodle? So let's have a look through that. This is something that I've only started working on in the past few months. Connor is here and he's an expert. So if I get anything wrong, Connor, I'm sure will point me in the right direction.
I wouldn't say that and repeat.
So this is my module in Moodle, Turnitin webinar. I'll add the materials and the recording from this session, the PowerPoint, the links will all be added here as well. So you'll be able to see all of those. So I'm going to turn on editing. I'm going to go into my test activity and add an activity or resource. And we're going to choose Turnitin assignment. And this is where I always start looking a bit strange because I'm looking over my other screen instead of at the camera, so apologies. You need to give your Turnitin assignment a name. You can give it a description, so the description can be instructions for students. It can outline the assignment and it can include any specific submission information, such as the amount of parts in that submission. So the submission type, you have two options here. Two options that we'll use is the file upload, in which they're uploading either a PDF file or a Word document, or they can enter text directly into a text box and turn it in, and that will compare it. But we generally use file submissions, but text submissions can be useful as well. You can set the limit to those file submissions. Across the rest of Moodle, the limit on a file size is 2 gigabytes, but for Turnitin, it's only 100 megabytes, but that's more than sufficient for nearly any Word document. I think it would have to be a fairly hefty thesis with a lot of diagrams and images in it to break that limit of 100 megabytes. Allow any submission file type, so yes or no. And for each of these options, you have a little question mark beside it. And so if you're wondering what any of the options are, you can click on that and it will give you the details on it. So this setting will allow any file type to be submitted. Submissions will be checked for similarity where possible. Submissions will be available for download, and gradebook feedback tools where available or will be available where possible. So what that's saying is, using the Feedback Studio, Feedback Studio will try to open the files that the student has submitted. If the file type isn't a PDF file or a Word document or some other types like true text or an open text file, then Turnitin won't be able to render that, and you will have to download the file to manually grade it, which can be a bit of a pain. So that's the file types. Display similarity report to student, yes or no. So do you want to see them to see the similarity score? So for me, the question here is, and again, it's up to your own academic preferences, whether you want to show them that or not. So my preference would be to show them the similarity score to allow them to correct any mistake they may have made. Do you want to display the grade? So show it as a percentage or a fraction, and I'll explain to you further what that means when we look at those the grading functions, and auto refresh the grade scores. So yes, automatically refresh the similarity scores, or no, I'll refresh them manually. So then we're into the assignment parts. You can see up at the top here, I've got assignment part 1. So I've only got one assignment part detail here. So I'm going to call that essay, and I'm actually going to add a second part now. And you can see that that adds in assignment part 2 here. And I'm going to call that reflection. So you can have separate start dates for when the student will see that in the Turnitin submission, a separate due date and a separate post date for each assignment part. You can click on the calendar to say, well, that opens today and closes on Monday. And this one opens on Sunday and closes on Monday. And then the post date. Connor, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the date that the actual grade will be posted to Moodle?
Post date is basically the date that the, in the grade book, when this, just say for argument's sake, the lecturer will grade it, we'll say, whenever they actually do grade it. It could be well in advance of the course boards.
Yeah.
So what will happen is, if you don't want the students to see their marks until the course board, you set the post date till the same date as the course board. And then what happens is the student will not be able to see the grade that they got until that post date.
Perfect. So if it is a summative assessment, if it's an end of semester assessment, you might not want the student to see that grade for the assignment until the course boards. Thanks very much, Connor. So for each part as well, you can set the max marks for it. So for this assignment, I'm going to say the essay is worth 70 and the reflection is worth 30. So the next set of options is for your similarity report options. So allow submissions after the due date, yes or no. So students can submit after that due date, but you'll get a notification to say this student submitted the essay 2 days late or 3 days late or whatever it is. The report generation speed, you've got 3 settings here. Generate reports immediately. Students cannot resubmit. So they only get one go and they get one similarity score. And that's it, they're cut off. Students get a generated report immediately and they can resubmit until the due date. So that one already says that when a student posts, they'll get a similarity score within a couple of seconds. And then if they're not happy with that, they can change their document and resubmit it. So after 3 resubmissions, it starts to give them a penalty and say, hold on now, you're kind of abusing the system here. You're trying to game it. We're only going to give you a similarity score every 24 hours now. So we're going to make you wait. So if I have a document, it's getting a similarity score of 33%, I make some changes, resubmit it, goes to 30%, make some changes again, resubmit it, goes to 27%. Now I'm after submitting it 3 times and Turnitin says, okay, slow down, you're not getting another similarity report until tomorrow. So it kind of makes them think about what the similarity report is telling them. They'll go back and make as many changes as they can to their document because they know they're going to have to wait 24 hours again before they get a report. So it stops that constant kind of making a change, submitting to see if it works. And that's the one that we'd recommend, and that's the one that's most used. And the final option is to generate a report on the due date. So this one is when a student submits, and they don't get a similarity report from that until the submission date is passed, or until the day of the submission date. So they might have handed up a week in advance. They're not going to get that until the submission date. And that, I think that one's a little bit unfair on students because they can't work on the document and can't improve it. So store student papers. So we have a practice area on the library Moodle page where students can check their similarity score, and it doesn't store their papers on Turnitin's database, because if they did, when they went to submit it for real, it would try to compare it to the paper they've submitted in the library. So you can use this as a checker where the student's paper isn't saved on Turnitin's database, and it's just there as a reference checker for themselves, or as a tool for them to use. And that's quite a good one to know. So the two options are no repository, don't store this paper, or the standard repository. So when we're selecting the student papers and what to compare them to, we can check them against other student papers. We can choose yes or no on that. We can check them against internet articles. We can check them against journal, periodicals, and publications. So when we're generating a similarity score, it will exclude any common elements it has with other student papers against internet sources or journals, periodicals, and publications. For the bibliography, you can actually exclude the entire bibliography from the similarity report, and you can exclude quoted material as well. So I think I would generally have those as no, unless there's a specific reason why you want them compared to quoted material or bibliographies. I will leave them off because I think it's fair on the students. And I'm not just saying that because I have an assignment to hand up in 2 weeks to turn it in. So small matches is another important one. A small match can be a phrase, so it can be a word or two words that Turnitin might pick up on that are picked out. So if it compares your paper to another paper and says, right, you've clearly referenced that, or you've reused material from that. Anytime that you use slight phrases that have been used in that paper as well, it will highlight them for your similarity report. So they could be 1, 2, 3 word phrases. So you can set a limit to that. So it will exclude matches for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you want words. But they say that if an essay has a phrase that's 16 words and that matches to another author's work, the chances of that being original work are 1 in a billion. So, it's fair enough around the 1, 2, 3, 4 words, but when you get into the 5, 6 words, then they may be borrowing that work. And it's important to say as well that Turnitin is a tool for checking the originality of your students' work. What that means is that when you get that report, it will highlight similarities with other publications or papers or websites. That's not to say that it's telling you the student has plagiarized or is cheating. It's telling you that there is a similarity between what your student has written in this instance and what is published on this source. So that's an important thing to highlight as well. They would say that it's a similarity score, and it's a tool that you can use to check the originality of that student's work. So the grade mark options, Turnitin provides an incredibly powerful rubric tool. And there's a lot of different rubrics you can use in that, and you can make your own rubrics as well. So if I launch the rubric manager, it brings up this screen here. So if I increase that slightly, the size of the text, there we go. So in the rubric, you have columns for different areas that you want to test the student's essay against. And then you have different levels of understanding, perhaps, or different taxonomies that you lay out. And you'll say if they have claim, or if they reach that one, they've gotten 10%. If they get evidence, they've got 30%. If they got reasoning, they're up to 60%, and focus, they're up to the 90 percentile. So you can lay out the different criteria they need to meet in terms of the learning outcomes, and then the different pillars of learning outcomes they need to meet as well. You can create your own rubric, or you can borrow from rubrics that are already there. So if I was to create a new rubric, I can say this is the scale. So scale 1 is, do you understand Turnitin? I can use the similarity report. I've changed that. The next criteria might be that I can use the grade book, and the next one might be that I've used the rubrics. And then you can assign a percentage for each of those criterions. So for the first one, student gets 10%. For the second one, the student gets 30%, 60%, 100. And you can type in here what exactly you want each of those criteria to be on each of the scales. How many marks are awarded for each scale. So if this is 30 marks on scale 1, then they'll get 10% of 30 marks for hitting criteria 1, 30% of the 30 marks for criteria 2, 60% of the 30 marks for criteria 3, and 100% to get the full 30 marks if they reach criteria 4. Does that make sense? Good. So you can create your own custom one. I'm just, for the sake of this, I'm going to reuse one that is up here. So if I take short answer, I'm going to lose the work I've done. It gives me a nice scale here. It also tells me that this rubric cannot be edited. So what I must do is to click on the top here and duplicate this rubric. And I'm going to give this a name. So that's now PW rubric 2. And when I click close on the top right, I can now choose from the rubric drop down. I should be able to. This worked for me earlier. PW rubric 2 should be in there and should automatically update. But we'll go with the PW rubric earlier.
You just wanted to refresh, Pete.
Yeah. Problem is, if you refresh at this point, you lose all your other settings. So a save and display might be best option, and then click on edit again. So let's duplicate this rubric again. We'll do that. Anyway, we'll figure out what's going on with that, because that, as I say, it was working earlier. Should be a save option. There we go. I didn't click on the save option. It's hidden underneath because I increased the size of it. So now when I click on save, I can close. And after that little scare, PW rubric 2 is now there. Common module settings. So the availability show on the module page. Do you want to hide it from the students temporarily until until the submission actually opens? So you might set this up a day in advance or a week or 2 weeks in advance and keep it hidden from students until you're ready for them to see it. You can give it an ID number, and you can make it visible for separate groups as well. So if you have your module split into groups, you can target different submissions at different groups as well. But we're going to say no groups. We're not going to restrict access, so you can add restrictions for dates, grades, user profiles, or restriction set. The date is quite useful because you can actually time this to go out at a certain time. So for example, this time last year, I know of lecturers who were not going to be available. One that was going to be in surgery, but wanted his submission area to be open. So he didn't have to go in and manually do that while he was recovering. It opened automatically, so he could just go in and set the time and date. Remembering that 0000 is midnight at the start of the day, and then 23:59 is heading towards midnight at the other end of the day. So if you're having that submission open until midnight on the 17th of November, then you would say that they would submit up until 23:55 to be able to submit that up to midnight. If you want to open it at midnight at the start of the day, then go for 0000. And that, going back to last May's one that caught a lot of people out, they wanted to open the submission until midnight, which they saw 0000, but the students couldn't access that for the whole day of the submission date and got quite a bit stressed over it. And then tags, we don't really use them in Moodle at all. So I'm going to save and return to module. That's my entire submission area set up. going to turn off editing. So now you can see that restriction is there because it's available from the 17th. I've set a time on that. So if I want to edit that again, I click on the edit button, click on edit here, edit settings, and we'll take that restriction off it. So remove that restriction. Now we'll save and return to module. And now there's our Turnitin submission area. So if I go into this, you can see it's got my, this is the lecturers view. It's probably the administration view because I am an administrator. So I see John has already added himself to this module. Well done, John. So John, I'll ask you to submit a paper there. So any Word document you might have on your computer, I'm going to do the same here. Just bear with me a second. So I just have to log in as my student here separately, my student user.
I'll submit a student on this side, Peter.
Excellent. Thanks, Connor. So Reggie Dwight is Connor's stage name when he's not been Elton John in real life.
And Paul Hewson.
And Paul Hewson is the other one.
Dave Evans.
So if you ever see any member of U2 on your modules or Elton John's real name, you know Connor's having a look around or he's helping you with something. This is my student account. I'm going to go to Turnitin webinar submission. Find a document. So, there we go. So you can see this submission is broken down into essay, and it tells me that there's 70 marks available for that essay, and reflection, and there's 30 marks available for that reflection. It also tells you the start date and the due date and the post date. So students will be able to see that. If I want to submit a paper, I'll click on the up arrow here. As a student, I can drag in a file. And you can see that the submission statement is here. If I try to add, it won't allow me. I need to click on the submission statement before I can add that submission. It's now uploading it to my Turnitin, and it gives me a digital receipt as well. And I'll be getting an email with that digital receipt too. Close that back down. I can see my digital receipt. I can access that. I can access the file, and I can see that the similarity score is pending. If I refresh the page, it shouldn't take long for that similarity score to come in. So it's saying, great, I have a similarity score of 1%, which is incredible. It's probably the lowest I've ever had for any of my work anyway. And
Reggie's on 100%.
So as a student, then I can go in and see where I lost that 1%, which is there. And when I click on that, I can see the source where I borrowed that stat from without referencing it. So there's no feedback for this document yet, so the student won't be able to see it. But what I'll do is I'll go back into the the lecture review, and I'll refresh the page now. So I can see that poor Reginald has got 100% because Connor's probably tested that same paper previously. So if I click onto Reggie's paper as a lecturer or as a teacher, you'll see the options have changed here. So up in the top, it gives me the student's name, Reggie's paper, and now I can actually circulate between those papers. So I can go back to Peter's paper or go forward to Connor's paper. So you can go from one paper to the next without having to click back, download papers, grade them locally, then upload those marks again. So on the right hand side, you have a number of different layers. So if I click on the top one, it expands the layer activities, and I want to include similarities on this paper. So by clicking on similarity, it shows me all the similarities that come up. So on post, for some reason, this is all similar to other content that is available for on post online. So well done, Reggie. And you see the options here. So the red are all of the matches. And if I click on this, it gives me a list of all those matches, and I can click through the individual articles that were quoted. You can see the submission score and a breakdown of that score. And then you'll get a percentage of all of the different sources and the similarity to those sources. So you can see it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. But now I want to mark this assessment. So if I go into the marking area, I've got a number of options. So these are phrases that you can drop on for the student. Improper citation. You're being a bit vague there, Reggie. You can add new ones in here. So commonly used, create new set of remarks. So for each of your assessments, you might come up with a set of feedback for your students. So you can literally click and drag those onto the document for your student to see. And I change the position of the close button for this, which gets confusing. So I can change then from the commonly used set to my own that I've created. You can have different sets for, academic integrity, composition, format, so different things like that. So it's a quick way, very quick way of giving the feedback to the student. You can write text-based comments for the entire, so that's kind of a summary of the feedback. Or you can record in up to 3 minutes of audio to feedback to your student. So if you don't feel like typing it, or maybe dictating it might be easier, they can press play on that recording and listen back to what you have to say. So again, a very quick way of giving feedback. So now we set up our rubric and we want to mark the student. So because we have that rubric set up, PW rubric 2, we've got sliding scales here for each of our verticals. So for each of the verticals, then we had different statements. So the claim, well, did I, go for advanced? Did I go for proficient, developing, or emerging? The evidence, so you're not increasing the mark here, you're decreasing the mark the further you slide to the right. So turning that on and marking your rubric, you can scroll down here, or you can use this to see what you said. Okay, I said for emerging under organization, it was going to be this, this, or this. So you can refresh your memory very quickly, and in one place, you can see what exactly meant by language, advanced, proficient, developing, emerging. What do they mean by that? Okay, so they match that, yes or no, and you can change your sliding scales. And when you've done all that, it's saved automatically back into the gradebook. So it's a very quick way to give feedback to students. It's a very quick way to grade each of your assignments. And when you're finished with Reggie, Connor, is there an action there to save that, or does it save automatically?
What's that, Pete?
Sorry, does that save automatically, or does that
save automatically? Yeah.
Great.
Any changes you make on the Are any annotations and stuff?
Yeah, and the rubric.
Yeah, I think any changes are saved automatically. If you
Right.
go forward to the next student.
Yeah. So again, you can bring up the rubric, and you can attach that to the assignment so that the student can see that as well. So now if I go to Peter's one, I can change all those scores again. And that's great, and that's saved. Or you can jump between students. So if you want to jump from student 1 to student 10, which I've done in the past when grading, because you want to go, okay, did I give the marks for that statement or did I penalize them for it? I can't remember. I'll go back and have a look. So you can jump between the submissions very quickly as well. And that's the feedback studio. That's rubrics covered. So I think if I go back to my PowerPoint presentation, so we covered what is Turnitin, what's in their database, what is plagiarism, when should I use Turnitin, how do I add a Turnitin activity to Moodle, the rubric manager, submission statements, similarity scores, and feedback have all been covered now. So I think that's everything, and that's a lot to get through in just over 40 minutes. So if you have any questions, which I'm sure you do, myself and Connor will be more than happy to answer. Emma, I see you have your hand up there.
Thanks a million, Pete. Just in terms of when you were in there and you were doing that grading, I could see the 70 at the top. But where do you put their